Delight Your Marriage, episode 30.
Welcome to the Delight Your Marriage podcast, the show where you hear from amazing and inspiring wives sharing their struggles, triumphs, and advice for this journey called marriage. Here's your host, Belah Rose.
Hello. This is Belah. Thank you for being here. Honestly, this is huge that you take your time to invest in your marriage and consider what God might want to teach you today. And I want to do a huge shout out to those of you that joined me on Tuesday night for that webinar. Thank you. It was awesome. I feel like there was so many great insights that God just brought out from the scriptures about intimacy and marriage. I think that, it's just so good. So there were so many of you guys on there. It was just brilliant. I mentioned that my love language, my primary love language is words of affirmation. So thank you for being so generous with your words of affirmation. I feel really loved and encouraged, and it's so nice to see that this is truly changing marriages. I mean, so many of you reached out and said that God taught you brand new things about your marriage, and some of you have been married 44 years, 33 years, 27 years, and then just a simple hour-and-a-half webinar has increased your understandings of God's purposes for your intimacy. It's just incredible. So thank God for that. If you did miss it, I'm sorry you missed it. But the next live, not recorded one is actually going to be June 2nd. That's another Tuesday. But go ahead and sign up. That's delightyourmarriage.com/webinar. I asked on the webinar, would you suggest this to a friend? And you won't believe the amount of positive feedback and exclamation points I saw. So, if you have been on the webinar with me, please remember to send it to a friend, because you don't know how many marriages God is going to turn around just through our conversation. Again, Tuesday, June 2nd. So I really hope that you'll be able to shift things around, get babysitters when you need to, whatever needs to happen, so that you and I can have this really, really important conversation. Okay, let's dive into Brad and Kate. They have got wonderful insights. This is the second half of their interview, and you can tell they are all in. You know, they love Jesus. And funny enough, I didn't even realize this, but it turns out I have been to their church a couple of times because of just conferences that happen. So just a cool connection, but they are really wonderful, warm, loving people, and they've got a lot to teach us. So if you didn't listen to part 1 yet, go back to episode 29 and listen to the first half, but this is the second half. Really great insights, and let's go ahead and dive in. Cool. Well, I want to kind of shift into the next part of the interview just to ask, you told us a bit about the history. I want to know how things are in your marriage now. What's the difference? How things changed?
Things are amazing. The biggest way that I can say to people is we are on the same page about marriage and God's desire for it. So that doesn't mean that, people, oh yeah, you guys, perfect marriage. No way. We still struggle. There are still times that I feel like we start into a cycle that is old habits. But usually one of us will look at the other and say, okay, this is not good. Like, we need to refocus. Like, we're just much more aware. We communicate. So we just talk. Okay, if we see something happening between the two of us, or we haven't had sex in a while, which for us isn't a while like it used to be, but we just look at each other and say, we need to find time for each other. Mm-hmm. We are on the same page about what makes our marriage work, what God wants from it, and, how we are going to proceed forward. And some of those things that, cause friction are things outside of our control. We have kids and obligations and jobs. And so sometimes it will be outside forces throwing things at you. But again, just looking at each other and saying, okay, how are we going to deal with this? How are we going to get through this time together? And it's for us too. I mean, we just continually doing marriage stuff. I mean, doing our blog, but also doing the marriage ministry at church, just talking marriages with people, really keeps us on our toes, and keeps also just, I always say, because we're doing things in marriage, we're talking about things, bringing it to the light. The enemy is going to try to attack us, and keeping that at the forefront too, of understanding what the enemy, wants to try and attack us, and seeing those attacks when they come, and recognizing them as such, and just seeking out Jesus for the help that he can shed on those things. And so our marriage is good. I mean, Brad is my favorite person to be around, and he is the one I protect the most, other than my time with God. And I don't know what else. I mean, if you have specifics, I don't know if that was just kind of generic. What do you think?
Well, the only thing I was going to say is just a good thing for everyone to know that getting into marriage ministry, and if you know anyone in marriage ministry who's either starting something at your church or doing something, pray for them, because there's absolutely attacks on people who are putting out God's word about marriage. And, Kate and I can chuckle about it now, but like some of our more recent tough days are usually when something significant is happening in the marriage ministry we're leading at church. And so it absolutely connects. And even to the point, like if we have leader couples doing stuff at that, in that ministry, like a lot of times they'll say, as they're getting started, man, we had a really rough week, and we just start to recognize it and pray for them, and just be there and know that, it doesn't mean everything's perfect if you're going to step out and lead and share how God's growing in your marriage. And sometimes it's still hard.
It's just recently we met with a couple that was going through our marriage program, but they're just having a really rough time with something specific in their marriage. And Brad and I sat down with them, had coffee for like an hour and a half, and then we leave in the car arguing, and we were just like, but we recognize it for what it is, but we were still like, the issue they were having brought up something that, so we started talking about it, started to get a little frustrated with each other. And, you realize things and you recognize them for what they are, and you just don't let them fester and go to the level that they used to. It doesn't mean you don't have struggles. Everybody does. And it doesn't mean we never have struggles where sex is concerned, but we just talk about it and try to be understanding. And
the other thing I would say is, I think a lot of people have this perception that once they reach a great marriage, whatever that looks like, that it's going to stay there.
That it's easy.
And that it becomes easy. And that's not true. Like it is, I often talk about it as kind of like the tide. And, there are times that the tide is rolling out in our marriage. It's just we've gotten more sensitive to recognizing that, and then coming together and say, what are we going to do to fight that? Or what are we going to do to change that? And how do we work together on that? Because it still happens. Like life happens, that we get busy, we get crazy, somebody's in a bad mood or somebody's sick or whatever. And, it's not 10 every day. It's real life.
Yeah, definitely.
No, that's so good. And I just have a follow-up question about that, Brad, is you mentioned praying for people that are in marriage ministry. And I mean, why do you think there is such a spiritual attack on marriages in general and marriage ministries?
Oh, that's easy. Because I think the enemy knows that if you have strong marriages, you have strong churches that have strong youth ministries, that have strong outreach ministries, that have strong pastors, everything. Yeah. And if you can attack marriages, then all of those ministries weaken as well.
Why? Why do they weaken? Like,
how many times have we seen a really awesome preaching pastor go down because his marriage is in trouble?
Right.
Or, places where youth ministers have fallen and taken a whole lot of people with them because there's something going on in their marriage. Like, I think it just so often is the root of where some sin sometimes starts, is if things aren't solid in your marriage, other places can happen.
I was going to say too, I always say that I think the enemy has the most to gain from breaking up marriages. And I think one of the main reasons is, the Bible talks clearly that marriage is a picture of Christ and the church.
Yep, that's right.
And so God is using our relationship to teach us something about the relationship between Christ and the church. Like, that's huge. And this is the only relationship he gave sex to as a gift. He didn't give us something special with our friends or our parents. Like, you can pretty much experience a lot of, and this is a relationship he carved out as special. And it affects everything. There's the marriage ministry that we do at our church. One of the church that developed it, one of the ladies who was a part of that, she said, we can talk about like when we have bad things, something bad happens and how it has a spider effect, kind of, goes out to this person and this person. And she said, but ever since our marriage has been redeemed and changed, I can do the same thing and show you how it's changed people for the good. And, she said, and we can start with our 2 daughters, and then we can go to their friends that were affected by it, and my parents and his parents, and like how it all spiders out. And so you can look at the bad and how that would affect, and you can look at the good. And I think that, the marriage relationship, our marriage with our 3 kids, that's going to affect them greatly, and affect their marriages and affect their spouse. And so it just has that spider effect. And I just think marriages are under, a lot of stress and a lot of attack. And that's because they're one of the most special relationships out there.
Amen. That's brilliant. I just love that. And, sometimes I'm new to the marriage ministry myself. And, sometimes when I'll talk to someone about it or reach out to someone online or whatever, I almost feel this, oh, she took the easy way out. She's talking about sex. Of course, everyone's going to listen to what she has to say, as if like sex is this frivolous thing that, is just attractive, but not deep in any meaningful way. But I just love that you've given so much depth to the purposes behind it, why sex is so important. Because look, the spider, reaches out into, all this web of like all these wonderful blessings that God has done because you're in this really connected union in your marriage. It's just
absolutely,
I completely agree. Now I want to ask
I would say sex is a very small percentage of your marriage, but if that percentage isn't there, it becomes a very important thing that is missing.
Almost like the 80-20 principle. Is that what you're kind of getting at? Is that?
And I don't have the numbers. I just, one of our friends just blogged this recently that he said, if you look at the percentage of time that sexual intimacy actually takes in your week, it's like, 1/16 of a week or something. It's a really small percentage, but if that isn't there, what else happens? Like what else, happens in your marriage? If that's missing, it's really important, but it's such a small thing.
That's awesome.
And so I think it's important to put it in its place, because I do think some couples over focus on, it's not happening in the bedroom, then nothing happens. Well, that's not true either. Like, we don't just love each other in the bedroom. Like, we got to figure out all of life together, and recognize that there's other things too, but it is also really important.
That's so good. Well, I don't know if there's anyone listening that likes business literature, but I really love business literature. And there's one principle they talk about in business where it's called the 80-20 principle. And so it's basically like 20% of your effort is focused and that's where you get 80% of your results. So you kind of have to figure out what's that 20% so that you can really focus on it and make it great. So then you get that 80% results. And I've never thought about it in the bedroom, but I completely agree that it's maybe 20%, maybe less than that, of the fullness of your life. And yet it gives and adds to 80% of blessings and goodness, those kinds of things. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Kate, I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned that you still have struggles in your marriage, and even in the area of sex. How do you think the relation or the conversations that you have now in the area of sex are different than the conversations you had before when things were bad? That makes sense?
Yeah, no, it does. I think before it's just very much a shift in perspective. I was so stuck in my own self-pity over, I feel broken, this isn't working for me, that conversations were always just, I'm not sure we actually had conversations about sex. I think we would just pick fights about other things because that would be easier to sort of hash out, or, I could tell he definitely wanted it and I was just trying to find a way to avoid it. So I'm not sure that I guess we had conversations now and then, but not much, because nothing really comes to mind. I was just an avoider. Yeah, once, that time where I was just seeking him out and clinging to him, I'd say a couple weeks into that, we started having conversations. He actually did one day look at me and say, okay, what's different? Because something's different. And so it was a long, blessed couple of months, but we really started to talk about all of our relationship. And, we started to really talk about how I felt in those first couple of years of marriage, how he felt in those first couple of years of marriage, and started to own how we hurt each other, how, it was really eye-opening experience, some of the stuff that I didn't even realize how I'd hurt him, and vice versa. So I can't say that we were good at talking about it then. I think because I didn't understand myself well, I was very, I didn't really know what I would say to the conversation, just that I didn't really want sex. So now we just, we're just really open about it. And if I'm struggling at times, I tell him it's not you, and it's, and I still sometimes do get frustrated, and I don't like that part of me per se, but I think Brad is secure in knowing that I desire him and that I love him. And so it's okay. How can we work through this time? How can I help you? Is there something I can do to take off your plate that will make you feel like you have more time and energy? For us, he's just really attentive. And so our conversations for sex flow pretty naturally now. And there's not a lot of frustration there, but it's just that mutual, okay, you're struggling now, so how can I help you? And to be honest, we have entered a different phase of life. And so there are times Brad's just like, yeah, I could just go without tonight, and that's been a different dynamic, just okay. And just perspective change and understanding that. And, so we just talk about things when we need to talk about them, and know that we're not trying to hurt the other one, but that we're trying to gain understanding, and, and how can I help you? And so
that's great. That's so good. Well, I just noticed the time, and I feel like we've got to run through these next questions because it's just been so good. But if you don't mind sharing what you think the chief 3 things are that you feel have been central to your marital success.
Sure. I wrote them down. I would say number 1 is working on yourself, realizing that you can only change you in your marriage. And so that's number 1. And then focusing on that change and figuring out what you need to change. I tell people say, how do I know what I need to change? I said, if you could list 5 things that your husband needs to change, write them down, and then look at them and see how you can change that situation. How can you affect that for the positive?
Good.
And then with those things, if you write down 5 things, work on one at a time. That's something I always say, because people get overwhelmed with, I just wrote down 10 things. I can't change 10 things today. Focus on one at a time. And then the third thing that I say is just really seeking out God. And maybe this one should go first, but just seeking out God and asking him what he wants from you as a wife, seeking the scriptures. What does he say to wives? Don't look at what he says to husbands, but what does he say to wives? And just, praying, God, what do you have for me in the scripture? When I was trying to figure out what God wanted for me as a wife, and I we all have different personalities, so it doesn't always necessarily look the same, one marriage to the other, but I just looked up in a big old concordance the word wife, and I read every story, every scripture that dealt with wives. And awesome. I just, so super spiritual, you just look up in the concordance, and I did that. And I just, every time, God, what do you have for me in this story? And some things, there were more than others. Some things, didn't necessarily jump off the page and into my heart, but, just seeking those out. Ephesians 5 was a big one for me. And just, just seeking to love Brad as God wants me to, and doing so regardless of the response you get, regardless of putting expectations on him. So those are the things that I would say. Those are the things, the top 3 things that changed our marriage, was just looking at myself and figuring out what I could do and seeking God in that, and changing what he's calling me to do.
Yeah. No, that's really good. Yeah. Okay. So focus on yourself first. And then number 2, work on one at a time, the things that you want to change. And 3,
Yep.
which you said could be the first one, seeking God
Right.
about it
Yeah.
and all that. I love how
Yeah.
practical you are about that. And I'll have the, all the scriptures that you mentioned, Ephesians 5 and et cetera, linked in the show notes so people can find that easily. Now I want to ask, we've talked a lot about sex so far, but if there was one tip that either you or Brad could give to a wife about intimacy that she might even be able to implement tonight, that would be awesome.
One tip. I see that question in front of me and I'm like, one tip. I would just say if nothing else, one of the best bits of advice that I got was, even when I was struggling, if nothing else, focus on pleasing him. Because sometimes we get so stuck in our own mind of, I don't want to be here, or I'm too tired, or whatever. And when I started to shift that and think, okay, that may be true, but let's set it aside and see how I can please him and make him feel good and focus on him. It's amazing when you're struggling in life, if you just take the focus off of yourself and focus on giving, and in this instance, giving to your husband and pleasing your husband, how much of a difference that can make. And that has helped me numerous times, just mentally, to kick whatever else is going on in my mind away for a little while and just just focus on pleasing him. And usually, honestly, God always has blessed me through that. And it's not too long that I'm there myself. I'm into this. Okay, let's go. And so I just think, just focus on your husband and don't even try to put everything else aside. I know that's hard, but listen to his cues that he's giving you and just focus on him.
That's good.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything you wanted to add, Brad?
Just say, from the male perspective.
All right. So something that she can do tonight. See, I usually talk to guys, so that one's a little bit harder, but and I'm trying not to sound terrible by this, but there is a place where all of the intimacies are connected. And so we often talk about sexual intimacy, emotional intimacy, and spiritual intimacy, and intellectual intimacy. And the reality is they are all connected. And if you figure out a way to dramatically increase one, the rest of them will go along with it. And it may not be immediate, but it will happen because they are all connected. And sometimes, like if I was talking to guys, I would say, hey, if you want to have more sexual intimacy, you need to figure out, how do you ramp up emotional intimacy? How do you be there for your wife? How do you connect? But if we're talking to women, usually the easiest thing for them to do, not always, but usually, is, how do I increase sexual intimacy for right now, knowing that thing that I want, that emotional deep connection, will come as a result of that. And we've done that. Like, we encourage readers of our blog every February around Valentine's Day to do what we call a 10-day challenge, where we just encourage them to commit to having sex together for 10 days in a row. And the amazing thing that happens is all the couples write in how much they enjoy it, but it's not just about sex. It's about them finding time for each other. It's about them just having conversations together and communicating and working out, how are we going to make time for this? And because you're increasing sexual intimacy, all of the rest of the intimacy comes right along with it.
That's good. That's good. And I'm really glad that you mentioned the 10-day challenge. I'm going to also link that up. I think that would be really good for people to check out. It's just an awesome support to your marriage. Very cool. Okay. So is there due to the specific marriage that you've had, what opportunities have you had to serve God? We talked about that a little bit, but if you could touch on that just once more.
Yeah. Do you mean more like marriage ministry serve, or like personally?
Either one, actually. That would be fine.
Okay.
To give people just a vision of maybe the struggle they're going through right now is what God wants to work out on them in the long run to bless others and do for others.
Yeah, definitely. I think my marriage has taught me so much about myself, good and bad. and I think that that's what God designed it to be. You know, what's his name that says, can't think of his name, the guy that you like, and Gary Thomas. He says, you know, maybe marriage was meant, what's the quote? Maybe marriage was meant to make you
holy rather than happy.
Happy. You know, I think so that's so true, that God desires to use this relationship to not only bless us, which is what I think we enter marriage thinking this is going to be so amazing to share life together, but it is more to draw us to him and to show us the relationship between Christ and the church, and to teach us things about ourselves, to grind out selfishness, and God has done so much of that in myself, and I'm so thankful for it. I will say, for me, I had to be in an open place for that to happen. There were way too many years I was not open and just really, you know, just wasn't willing to do the things that God was calling me to do. Then, you know, and then once God has worked in our marriage and changed those things, and we encourage all marriages of this, not being silent about it. Like, you know, you don't have to necessarily start a blog like we did, or even run the marriage ministry at your church like we're currently doing, but you could mentor a couple. You could, you know, you could be in a small group, and just being marriage positive and speaking, bringing marriages into the light and speaking life in marriages. I just think that we all, you know, need to do that in our own small way, and it doesn't have to be huge. But I think that's part of changing marriages. And so we've been blessed with sharing our story online and also sharing our story in our local church. And so that's how we've been able to serve and get to know God through that.
And I like your encouragement of even if you're not running a ministry or something, you can still help someone. And, you know, Brad and Kate have made it very easy to help others, because all you have to do is just send a link. I mean, come on. Or, you know,
there you go.
There's plenty of information out there that they've given. So that's really wonderful. So I want to just move into, you mentioned Gary Thomas with, I really love his book, Sacred Marriage. So I'm glad you mentioned that. But is there another book or program you'd specifically recommend for wives, maybe who are going through the same struggle that you all have gone through?
Sure. I would encourage you to check out Reengage Marriage Ministry. It comes out of a church in Texas called Watermark. That's what we do at our church. They are, you know, have launched it only a couple of years ago. And so it's not in tons of churches, but if you go on their website, which is marriagehelp.org, you can find and see if any local churches in your area are doing it. Our church in Lancaster is doing it, and I have no doubt in a couple of years it's going to be in a lot more states and whatnot. But that's the first thing that I would say. It is the most unique, amazing marriage curriculum Brad and I have ever experienced. And as soon as we had it in our hot little hands, we were like, we have got to do this in our church. It is that good. So, and we would encourage you that, you know, any marriage can go through Reengage. You can be newly married and doing super well and just want to, you know, just learn new principles about a godly marriage, or you can be struggling severely. The curriculum, that's how amazing it is that it runs the gamut. So that's one thing we encourage couples. Specifically for wives, there, you know, 2 new books that I've read, and I know you had The Unveiled Wife on. Her book was amazing, and just reading her story and their struggles with intimacy, you know, it very much mirrored some of ours. Although we didn't have the physical difficulties, we certainly had other difficulties. And so I would just encourage you, if you've struggled in that area, that's a great book to read. But the other one that I've just been loving and I'm working through with our small group women in our personal small group is called Prayer for New Brides. And it's by Jennifer White. And she sent it to me, and it's just been amazing. And it says for new brides, and I almost wish she hadn't put it on there, because it's supposed to be preparing those of you who are getting or just about to get married. But it's written in such a way that you don't have to be. And it's just such good stuff about women in marriage. And, you know, they're very short little chapters, just really encouraging, just making you aware of the enemy and how he's going to attack your marriage, and just be encouraging of, okay, now what do you work on in your marriage? Just a great book that I would suggest for any wife to read, and don't get hung up on the fact that it says for new brides, because it's just that good that it doesn't matter.
That's so cool. Nice.
Yeah.
I'm going to check that out. Thanks for mentioning it.
Sure.
Any resource that you all provide that you'd like to mention?
Yeah, I mean, we have our blog. We do in a format where most of the time, either Kate and I will write a post of just something that God's put on our heart, and then a couple of days later, the other will respond, kind of from either the wife's perspective or the husband's perspective. And so, often, what you can find on our blog is places where, all right, if I'm thinking about this, how is my husband thinking about it? And kind of maybe read the other side, which sometimes finds helpful. And usually I'm writing to guys and saying, guys, here's things that you can work on and do better. And Kate's writing to wives of the same idea. So, we've been blogging now for 3.5 years. And so we have tons of stuff.
That's awesome. Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's oodles of stuff. It's been a long time. My goodness.
Apparently.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
there is oodles of stuff on there, for lots of different topics and marriage topics. So definitely you can find all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's really good. Mm-hmm.
And we do that format probably, I'd say 95% of the time. Sometimes we write, and to be honest, like one of us will write a topic and the other one will look at it and say, I don't really have anything else to add to that. Like sometimes it's hard to do the call and response, which is kind of what we do. But it is unique in that there aren't too many out there where it is both husband and wife kind of blogging back and forth. And so, so we just try to get both perspectives. And what are you looking at our first?
I had to go see. Our first post was in October of 2010. So she's right,
Well,
anyway, so just our blog. We've talked about doing books and stuff, but so far, we just haven't had that time or that leading where God's pushing that. So we'll just keep blogging and go from there.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, definitely check that out on onefleshmarriage.com, and that'll be in the show notes as well. Now, I want to just, I think since I have you both on here, I wonder if I could do something a little different with the last question. Sure. I usually ask if you could go back to the first year of your marriage, and you could sit yourself down, what would you say to you? But if you don't mind, I want to flip it and just say, if you could go back to that first year of marriage, what could you say to each other? And if you could both respond.
Oh, yeah. That's, if I had been brave, I just wrote a post on that about, I wish I had been brave in the beginning of our marriage. Honestly, not so much what would I ask Brad to change or advice that I would give him, but I would just tell that 21-year-old girl to just share with him where she's struggling, even if I'm sure it would have caused that young groom a lot of hurt, but I think my silence and my sticking my head in the sand caused even more. So I think if I could go back to that young bride, it would just be to be truly intimate with each other. It's not just about sex, but it's about opening our hearts and shedding off everything of us and being completely naked and being known. And so I think I would tell that young girl to say to Brad, hey, you know what? I desire you, but I'm struggling with desiring sex and I don't know why. And how do we move on from this? How do we make it better? Because this isn't what I wanted. This isn't what I thought our marriage and our sex would look like. So help me, because I don't want to be this wife. And I think that's probably what I would say. I don't know that in the beginning of our marriage, I would say he was unattentive. I mean, he certainly was. So I don't know. What would you advise me?
Well, and here's the thing. Like, I think that when you asked the question, I went honestly somewhere the same place. And I just actually over February preached a message at our church on intimacy and creating it by being transparent. And I think it's the same place that I was. That there were so many things about me and my past and things that I felt like if I told Kate, she wouldn't love me. And so I think I would tell that young kid that, it is through being transparent, that you will learn how to love, that we will learn how to connect.
I love that. Well, true to form, you both are focusing on yourself first. So I love that. Very good.
I was just going to add before you stop, seek help too.
Yeah.
And that's what we tell young couples. Like, I think I was so disillusioned by not understanding myself that you just want to naturally, you want to isolate.
Yeah.
And, here, two of us, we weren't doing marriage ministry. We were doing ministry in a church at the time we got married. And I think that sometimes also can make you feel even more isolated. And, I just wish that I had been brave enough to seek out, we together, but me specifically, a woman that I could talk to and just be open with and share my issues and not hide from them. And I just encourage young couples to seek someone out. It doesn't have to be your pastor, but if you know someone in your church that they just have, you can just sense they have a good marriage, just go to them, be vulnerable, talk. And I do realize that sometimes that's opening yourself up, and sometimes those situations won't work out, but your marriage is worth fighting for. And, just seek out someone who can help you, and don't be afraid to do so. It's not admitting defeat. In fact, it's a brave step for your marriage.
Oh, that's so good. So good. Yeah. So be brave. I love that.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, where can our audience find and connect with you all online?
You can find us at onefleshmarriage.com. And we're on Facebook and Twitter and Pinterest and all those places too. But you can find those links on our homepage at One Flesh Marriage.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Well, Brad and Kate, seriously, this has just been wonderful, and I know so inspiring for me and so many listening. So thank you so much for your time and everything that you've given.
You're welcome.
There's just so many nuggets that each of us can be implementing in our hearts and our thoughts about our spouses even now. Thank you again for listening. And if you have been blessed by Delight Your Marriage, can I ask you a quick favor? It does take a little bit of time, but it actually really helps more people listen and get a chance to see the podcast. If you go to delightyourmarriage.com/iTunes, you will be able to learn how exactly to write a review for the podcast. The reason this really matters is, yes, my love language is words of affirmation, and I do love the emails that I receive so much. But when you actually do a review online, what it does is it makes us go higher up in iTunes, whatever their algorithms or whatever. And so then more people are naturally able to find the podcast. That would really do a lot, not only for my encouragement and, the encouragement of all those that are interviewed on the podcast, but most importantly, it spreads the word. It gets people to hear this great message. So if you've been listening for a while, and there's so many of you that listen, thank you. If you haven't taken the time to give us a review, would you spend your time, maybe it'll take you 5 minutes, it might take 10. And while you're at it, why not check out what other people have said about the podcast and how it's changed their lives and marriages? Because it's kind of really cool to hear. Thank you, thank you, thank you. God bless you. I love you. And I'm praying that God would continue to bless you in your marriage. Good night. Bye. Or day or afternoon. Bye.
Thanks for joining. If you've been inspired by this show, would you help spread the word? If you take a moment to review and subscribe, others can find us more easily. Find out how at delightyourmarriage.com/iTunes. Until next time, live with love, wisdom, and passion.